black storm coming. See the lightning strike. Black people rising.
Hello and welcome to another edition of the Umoja Circle. My name is Keith Smokey Johnson. I'd like to welcome you to my show. The purpose, for those of you who are new to the Umoja Circle, like I always say, the purpose of the Umoja Circle is to correct errors where errors are found and to introduce facts where we find that so many people are working on fiction based on who we are as people of African descent. This is part two of a two-part show that I did to introduce a book that was written in 1935 by this great scholar called W.E.B. DuBois, as you can see. And the first part of the show, part one, I talked about this man. I went over his, education. He's the first brother to get a PhD at Harvard. The second one, of course, was Carter G. Woodson, and a little bit about his past. And I wanted to say that this book is a work that he wanted to show that there was a lie that black people, during a period of time, there was a chance for America to do the right thing. And it went from 1865, just after the war, to 1877. And I ended basically at the beginning of the war and just got into this part of the book where he talks about what we would know as the Black Reconstruction, which is basically the name of the book. And what he wanted to show that this book told the story of the fleeting experiment that certain white radical Republicans established in D.C. to try to make recompense for the 246 years of horror and abuse that was done to people of African descent. They came to a crossroads as he tried to express, in which we should go on into an interracial America that lived up to the words, because those words, all men are created equal, it was written down, but it was not practiced. It was all white men. But there was an opportunity after the Civil War, after the Confederacy was devastated, and certain laws like the 13th, 14th, and 15th Amendment were passed at the beginning of this Reconstruction period, and certain rights were given to black people to incorporate them into this society. But I always told you in previous shows that what was created in 1789 with the Constitution was a caste system. A caste system where the white was on the upper caste and blacks and Indians and other folks were in the lower caste, whether you know it or not. Okay, it was a caste system, and trying to incorporate, just like in India, where you have the Brahmins at the top and you had other groups in the lower caste. The same thing was established in America. You might not want to accept that truth, but this is why you had two Americas, as they said. In the 1965 Carter Commission, okay? Because there were two caste systems at least, okay? You put your Native Americans also in a lower caste. And the blending of those castes, there was backlash. And the backlash was this idea of white supremacy, that they were taught from the time of the colonial time that white people were at the top and black people was in a separate caste, and the two should not blend. And that was the rationale for the Civil War. Now we come into the end of the Civil War, and here you have these Northerners trying to blend black people with white people. Regardless of how the war ended, this was not happening, and we had this white backlash. This is what was going on during the Reconstruction. They had a crossroads where we could go down one path which would incorporate black people, and we had this interracial binding of America to live up to this multicultural system that but we still have much of America, white America, who saw we should still stay separate, okay? That there's a difference between blacks and white. That was nonsense, but that was the belief. So let's go on to where we left off so I can show what I'm trying to say. The radical Reconstruction began in 1867 to 1868. We left off in between 1865 and 1867 at the end of the last show, but we'll go on. We'll start with this next point. This is the congressional, so-called radical Republicans, Thaddeus Stevens and those folks, overrode Johnson because at the end of the last show, I was talking about Lincoln getting assassinated, and we had Andrew Johnson, who was the vice president, but he was a racist. He was a Southerner for Tennessee, one of the dumbest presidents we had. He couldn't even read, barely. But he was sympathizing with the South, even though he stayed with the Union, but he was still a Southerner at heart, and he still saw the N-word, as he would call us, as separate. And here we got these radical Republicans where he disdained, he did not like these folks. He wanted to, and they were bringing up all these laws that were going to blend us together. He wasn't having it. And he tried to veto everything they were putting together until they got pissed off and tried to impeach him. Okay? Again, they did have the majority in Congress, and they overrode Johnson, and they passed the Reconstruction Act in 1867. Former Confederate states divided into 5 military districts. Again, they had to force them to do this with these military troops in the South, required to write new constitutions with black male suffrage, means the right to vote, included into these new constitutions. You got to understand that these Confederate states in 1861 seceded from the Union, okay? But they had to get back, and in order to get back into the Union, or forced in the Union after they lost the Civil War, they had to rewrite new constitution, which include black suffrage, or black men's suffrage, because women wasn't even having the right to vote at the time, and black freedom and all those things, include us into this American revolution. So this was not the first, this is considered the second revolution. Okay, the first revolution was what happened in 1776. We always go back to then. But when you hear these conservatives today talking about going back to the original intent, they're talking about before this period of time. Okay, the original intent did not include black people. So you got to be understanding what you're hearing in the news today, what you're hearing some of these racist, white supremacist congressmen and senators when they talk about, and even Supreme Court just when they're saying original intent of the Constitution, they're talking about the period of time, the 80-something years prior to this period, because this is when the second revolution happened, where they included us in there, okay? This is when you had, again, the next point, the 14th Amendment was written in, passed in 1868, grant citizenship to all born in the U.S., guaranteed equal protection, and bars Confederate leaders from office unless they were pardoned. Now, you're hearing a lot about the 14th Amendment today. The 14th Amendment was created for people to look like me. Okay, the reason that they said that is because in 1857, the Dred Scott decision, that was to overturn the Dred Scott decision of 1857, where Taney, the Supreme Court Justice, Chief Justice, said that black people had no rights because they were not citizens. So they made sure they put it in the Constitution of the 14th Amendment after the Civil War in 1868 that said that as long as you're born here, that's where the birthright citizenship comes from. It was the birthright of black people. So if they're talking today about getting rid of the birthright citizenship, they want to get rid of that. So what's that going to do with black people? Think about that. Again, like I said in the last show, that it was white backlash that we had to deal with from this time to this day that we are dealing with, because this was the opportunity that was given by America to recompense for what was done for 246 years to black people. And a lot of other folks benefited from this amendment, the Chinese and other people who came into America. But if it wasn't for this amendment, which was created for black enslaved people, ex-enslaved people, after they were freed by the 13th Amendment. It was the 14th Amendment that made them citizens because of birthright citizenship. And you're hearing people talking about it today to get rid of birthright citizenship. What's going to happen to you, black man and black woman? Because you're a citizen based on the 14th Amendment. Okay, union leagues mobilized newly enfranchised black voters. They built schools and churches and become the backbone of the Republican organizing across the South. Okay, that's when the Republican Party or the radical Republicans were for us, not the same people. 1964, that was a switch. A lot of the Democrats, the Confederate Democrats, switched over to the Republican Party in 1964. So the people who consider themselves Republicans today are not the Republicans of 1868 or 1865 or 1867. No, they're totally different. All the Confederate Democrats jumped ship during Goldwater's nomination for president. Okay, again, white backlash. Let's go on to the next one. This is the thing that black people who were becoming congressmen and senators and state senators brought to the South during this Reconstruction. Public education for all children. That was based on black politicians. Voting rights protected in the constitutions of all the southern states that had to come back into the Union. Civil rights were expanded. There was the Civil Rights Act of 1868, Civil Rights Act of 1870. You think 1964 was the only Civil Rights Act? No, but every time we made those gains, there was this thing called backlash, white backlash, trying to bring us up to the point before these times. You're hearing it today. Social welfare was established. We were working non-compensated for 246 years without pay. Of course, our labor established this country as a industrial juggernaut, non-compensated. We were owed that. Our ancestors were owed that. And when our taxes, we started to pay taxes during this period of time, we had the right to get what our taxes we were paying for, okay? Let's go on, just like any other citizens, according to the 14th Amendment. Black political power and democratic gains, that's from 1868, 1875. Again, everything that I'm talking about here is in this book called Black Reconstruction. Black men voted. They held office, served in state legislatures, and sent representatives to Congress. 15 black congressmen and 2 black senators served during that Reconstruction, that 12-year period. And those things that you saw previous, you know, the public schools and all that, those were ideas initiated by these black office holders and established by state legislators that incorporated black people. Let's go on to the next. This is the image that's in one of a famous image that you found in one of northern magazines, illustration of black people voting. Okay, various different well-dressed black people, okay, voting. Okay, we have always took our citizenship seriously. Okay, let's go on. These are some of the congressmen. Okay, look at us. We were in these, Old Man River, the image that came out of black people being these, dumb, listless kind of people. We were no different than any white man in this country. But the image that came out of this period of time that still exists to this day contradicts the truth of these images. A picture speaks 1,000 words. Let's go on to the next. Again, we had 15 congressmen, 2 senators, and 2,000 plus state and local officials. We had all that before segregation, okay? This is 1865 to 1876. By the 1900 and the racist Woodrow Wilson, who got rid of the last federal employees that were black. So what we went through the last year with this MAGA, when they got rid of most of these federal employees, majority of black or black women, we've been there before, okay? We had black federal employees in Congress, in state legislators. We had postal workers. We had everything that we had today. So if it happened then, it could happen now. And if you don't understand the past, you won't be able to recognize what's going on right in front of you in the present. That white backlash is real. Okay, let's go on to the next. New state constitutions in the South established public education for the first time for black and white children. Okay, like I said earlier, expanded social welfare and protected civil rights. Let's go on to the next. This is an image of one of the South Carolina state convention, and you can see there were black men and white men in the state legislature. This was South Carolina in the 1870s. Okay, many of you were told the first black person to go into Senate or become a state legislator is happening in the 50s and the 60s and the 70s. That is a lie. We were there, but again, white backlash eliminated it. If you don't learn the lessons of the past, you are doomed to repeat it now. Aren't they trying to roll back things right in front of us today? Let's go on to the next. Then you had the 15th Amendment, of course, that prohibited denying the vote based on race, cementing black political power on paper, let's just say. Let's go on to the next. And these were the great Reconstruction amendments. You had the 13th, of course, made us free black people from 246 years of enslavement. You had the 14th Amendment, which made us citizens, and you had the 15th Amendment, which gave us the right to vote. Okay, voting has consequences, as many of you found out in the voting of 2024. When reason black people voted in such droves in 90%, because we've been there. The oral history, the writings of brothers and sisters like Carter G. Woodson and W.E.B. Du Bois and all these great, black scholars told us that, and we recognize the same problems of white supremacists and that was incorporated in the MAGA movement. But again, there was other white people, liberals, who did not believe that we knew what we were talking about. Oh, that happened back then, around here. And look what's going on now in America, okay, the last year. Okay, it's 2026. We're dealing with a MAGA movement, white supremacists, the same ideology, the same kind of getting rid of black books in schools or black people working in federal government. What was going on today went on back then in the 1870s. If you don't learn that's why W.E.B. Du Bois wrote this book in 1935. And how many of you know this? Let's go on to the next. Du Bois' argument, this was the first genuine interracial democracy in American history, the Reconstruction era, an experiment in shared governance, unlike anything else the nation had ever seen. Prior to that, we were enslaved. Tawney said, that we weren't even citizens in 1857. There was a civil war where hundreds of thousands of men died to keep us enslaved. Okay? So this was serious. This is the sin of America, and we still haven't learned the lessons to this day. Let's go on to the next. White supremacist counter-revolution. A counter-revolution, you have a revolution. Usually a revolution, like I did a show on the Mexican Revolution, the counter-revolution by Thorne of 1836, where the revolution is from the bottom up, where the people have had enough, who were being abused, and they revolt, okay, against the elites. But a counter-revolution is when, after the revolution, those who were in power want to get their power back, and they do things to disrupt the development of the revolutions. Okay, those are the lower ones. Okay, we've had a white supremacist counter-revolution as a backlash to the Reconstruction, which was a revolution where black people who were at the bottom were slowly making their way up in society. Okay, being legislators, being homeowners, building towns. But guess what? White backlash. Same white backlash that created a MAGA, that created a Tea Party after Obama was put into office. Look what we're going through now. What's different? Almost immediately, white Southern elites and many poor whites organized violent resistance. Okay, January 6th. Okay. Look what happened. You think it was just because it was based on this ideology. Okay, we're losing America. Make America great again. Let's go back to this thing, white supremacy. Let's go back to before all this problems had it, where we started letting black people into our society. That's the ideology of white supremacy. If you don't understand that fact, you'll never understand what's going on today in 2026. Let's go on to the next. You had organizations, Ku Klux Klan, White League, the Red Shirts, used terror, murder, and massacre to suppress black voting and drive Republicans from power. DuBois and modern historians call this white supremacist terrorism. He said this in 1935. Aren't we saying that today in 2026? What have we learned? If you don't understand the history, you're doomed to repeat it. We tried to warn people in what do you think black people were talking about in 2024? Go out and vote. But you didn't want a black woman to do that, just like they didn't want black men to be in Congress in 1877 and 1880s. They didn't want a black woman in 2024. And we'd rather have a white supremacist system, white backlash, who would follow the premises of the Ku Klux Klan, the White League, and the Red Shirts. The same ideology that they're following then is happening today. That's what a white supremacist is. This is what we had to deal with. This was the black backlash. These were the ex-Confederates that we had to deal with in 1870s, okay? But they still exist today. You don't see the Black Panthers existing or any other pro-black organizations existing from the 60s. No, but you still have the Ku Klux Klan. We still have all these different organizations and groups ready to start a civil war or race war. Nothing new. Okay, let's go on to the next. This is just an image of, in that picture up there at the top, that's them when they were young. And they were so proud of themselves. 50 years later, that's the older version of them. You know, why? Just because black people wanted to be equal with you, you are proud of the fact that you terrorized them, that you took a picture of it. This is the kind of mentality of white supremacy. And you don't think it's just black men, white men, it's a family affair. Look at the kids. You got to understand that those senators that we call racist today were children in the 1950s and the 1960s, okay? The same people who are in charge of the MAGA movement today that might be in the 70s and 60s, they start out as children. Where did they get that ideology? If we don't understand this truth, this came out of that Reconstruction period, the lying to themselves. They had to justify why they did that. That's where the lost cause came out of. Okay, it wasn't about slavery, it was about whatever reasons. But this is the reaction to black people just becoming American citizens. Okay, let's go on to the next. You got massacres. One of the massacres you might have heard of, in 1876, you had the Hamburg massacre. You had the Colfax massacre in 1873. Massacres and countless lynchings demonstrated that redemption is achieved through bloodshed. White politicians openly celebrated violence as necessary to redeem the South from the Negroes. This is what they said. Okay, the redemption movement. Let's go on to the next. Okay, the sentiment justifying the 1876 Hamburg massacre as necessary for the redemption, the violent restoration of white supremacist rule in South Carolina after the convention, which added schools and talked about welfare for everybody, but we couldn't have that, are heavily documented, particularly in the rhetoric of a senator, state senator, Benjamin Pitchfork Ben Tillman. Listen to what he said. Let's go on to the next. Ben Tillman on the justification of violence, okay, the redemption of white rule. As white men, we are not sorry for it, and do not propose to apologize for anything we have done in connection with it. We took the government away from them in 1876, and we did take it. And this regarding that massacre. That's how they took it, by killing people who have to be black and in public office. Let's go on to the next one, okay? The Compromise of 1877, then I'll stop down here. This was a dispute this was the end of Reconstruction from 1865 to 1877. The dispute between the election of 1876 between Rutherford B. Hayes, Republican, and Samuel Tilden. Behind closed doors, a deal was struck. Hayes became president in exchange for removing all remaining federal troops from the South and abandoning enforcement of the civil rights of black people, basically. Let me stop right here. You've heard of the Posse Comitatus Act that came up in recently, where it talked about troops in American City. But a Posse Comitatus Act came out of that compromise. It was to prevent Union troops from policing southern states, which allowed they removed Union troops that were protected in black townships. That's where the Posse Comitatus Act came in 1878. Okay, the Compromise of the South. Okay, this was a northern newspaper saying that we betrayed those Union soldiers. So I'm gonna leave that right there. Okay, if you don't understand the truth of your past, you will be doomed to repeat it. So until next time, I hope I gave you a little insight. Peace, Hotep, bye-bye.